One of the topics that comes up frequently at our events is multi-generational talent and how to truly build an effective workforce that includes so many different generations. So for our next panel, we've invited supply management leaders from 4 different companies and 4 generations. We're excited to hear how their answers compare and if there's a true difference between how the generations perceive the working environment. Panelists today, we have Kyle Ruggaard, Supply Chain Analyst at Andersen Corporation and former CAPS Supply Chain Intern representing Generation Z. Cody Kuhne, Senior Commodity Manager at American Airlines representing Millennials. Pat Hopper, Director of Sourcing at FedEx representing Generation X. And Tim Fiore, Chief Procurement Officer at Ryder Systems representing the Baby Boomers. Pat, I'm going to start with you. Many people were not prepared for the rapid shift to a work-from-home environment. What was your work environment prior to the pandemic, and how did you adapt to working 100% from home?
At FedEx, we've got 475,000 global team members, 90% of which are in our operations environment and deemed part of the critical infrastructure. So they've continued, of course, to deliver during this pandemic. However, our 10% office workers, we rarely worked from home. It was pretty much an exceptional basis, and only if, we had somebody who had maybe the cable guy come in and work with their manager to get approval to work from home that day. But once the pandemic hit, it was really remarkable, and kind of what Rob said on the prior panel, luck coming into play with things we had done from an IT system perspective to really position our company to be able to transition our employees, 85,000 of those, within 2 weeks to a work from home environment. So we went from pretty much an exceptional 0% work from home to 100% within 2 weeks. And I'd say, generally the adjustment has been smooth, really happened quickly. We found it's a lot more efficient. People are more productive. There's less disruptions in the office. Meetings seem to be a lot shorter, which everyone appreciates, of course. And I think the connectivity is the only concern where you have maybe some rural-based employees and their connectivity isn't as great for Zoom or WebEx or Teams type video calls. But outside of that, it's really been seamless and awesome to kind of be a part of.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. So Cody, similar question for you. I think that you have a pretty interesting story about the change in working environment. Can you tell us what your environment was like prior to this and then how that shifted for you?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the question, Nicole. So about a year ago from today, actually, American Airlines just started moving into our brand new corporate campus. We invested a little over $1 billion to build out several building facility to try to really be the home for all of our team members, both operational, like flight attendants in the field and pilots, as well as our corporate-based employees. And so, everyone was really looking forward to joining and coming into an environment where we had amenities such as dry cleaning services, a market to pick up dinner for your family on the way home, and really try to build an environment where folks were able to have all of their needs met on campus. And so it was a pretty unfortunate time for, the virus to strike just about 8 months into, American moving into our new home. And so it definitely caught everybody off guard. We did have some work from home policies in place that just differed from department by department. And that would, just an example would be 2 work from home days per month. And so most of our team members were set up and prepared to work from home if necessary, but it certainly was an abrupt transition, and it took a lot of concentration and effort to get everybody in a comfortable place where they could maintain productivity similar to levels that we had previously seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would be quite a shift going from, large investment in that large campus and then having everyone really distributed. So Tim, what about at Ryder? Deb would refer to this as being old school, and she would say that she also is old school, but did you previously support working from home?
Well, so thanks for having me, and it's good to be back to CAPS. I guess I'm the anchor here. I'm the baby boomer, and I guess I'm the oldest one on the panel. But I do remember when I was the youngest person in the profession, and it really doesn't seem like it was that long ago. But way back when, I remember my grandfather walking home from work. I could hear the horn in his factory go off, and 10 minutes later, I'd see him walk down the sidewalk with his lunch pail. And then when I first started my job, I worked for a company that designed and built a spacesuit. And we had an old school VP, and he would stand at his corner office that overlooked the sidewalk and watch for anybody who walked in a minute after 8 o'clock in the morning. And then I went on to Pratt & Whitney for a while, and you were not allowed to work any kind of overtime. 40 hours, that's it, out, nobody in the building. And the issue was really around the labor rate calculations. They were cost reimbursement contractors. So what it kind of said to me was, I'm here like 40 hours. I said, go. It had nothing to do with how much I really wanted to work. And then I was in Europe for a while, and I remember that I've always worked more than a regular workday, quite a bit more. And in Europe, on the continent, it's actually not allowed to work more than 40 hours either. In some cases, 36, I think it is in France. And they actually have a labor police that makes sure that that happens. So you have to really get your employees to kind of agree that they're going to go a little bit above and beyond and not just a standard work week. I think the issue for me around this from the beginning was that if you're not in the workplace environment constantly, then you're not getting the exposure that everybody else is, and you're not getting those go-to jobs that everybody really wants to move their career forward. And you're not establishing the networks that you really need to establish to move your career forward. And part of the reason is because you're not in the mainstream. But what's happened now is that none of us are in the mainstream. So the kind of the playing field is equal. We're all equal on these computers with these screens. And whether this is going to be long-term sustainable or not, I'm not really sure. I think we're going to need to know what happens after the virus ends, because in the case of Ryder, we're in no hurry to go back to the office environment. So my situation was I was one of the last ones in the office, along with the management team, but I also had a small team trying to respond to the PPE crisis. And I really felt at the time that we needed to be face-to-face to make a lot of decisions concerning how much to buy, where to buy it, how much to pay for it, where to put it, how to ship it out. And there was a crew of about 5 of us that were in there. And I do remember a couple of days before we finally pretty much shut the whole facility down that I thought that we had done all those major things that we really needed to do face-to-face, and that we probably could work from home. But lo and behold, we did end up going home because we had some people in the building who had confirmed positive, and we all had to be quarantined. So, but I think since that point in time, we've been really effective. I've actually picked up 1.5 hours of potential work because I'm not driving back and forth to work anymore. I used to drive back and forth and I'd be on the phone, hands-free, of course. But now I've got another 1.5 hours to work extra. So, like I said, I think it's all going to work itself out when you're not forced to not come to the office. I'm still concerned about career development. I'm concerned about if I hired somebody, how would I integrate them into Ryder? How would they establish those relationships with other people that help them understand what's really going on? How do they advance their career if you don't even really know who the person is? But it'll all work itself out.
Okay. Thank you. Kyle, I'm going to jump to you and ask you the first question. I'm going to talk to you about communication. So as the youngest generation in the workforce right now, do you feel any difficulties when communicating with different generations? And if so, were any of these amplified while working from home?
I wouldn't really call them difficulties, more opportunities to learn how to be flexible and adaptable is the best way to put it. This pandemic is a black swan event, but I've actually seen multiple. I just joined the workforce, but I've seen multiple black swan events in my short time on this earth. So I think we need to learn how to become better communicators, and that means to all generations. So to answer the question, really, I believe that younger people tend to adopt the technology a little bit faster, the newer technology that's coming out, that's, the cutting edge technology, whereas the older generations have used more antiquated technologies that they've used in the past, like email or like calling people. I know that seems really funny, but I have never had anyone in my company that are in their 20s actually call me on my office phone back when I actually went to the office. So I think the medium that we do communicate is going to change, and it changes depending on what generation you speak to. One example I could give you is meetings. Meetings used to take place in person, in a conference room with a set agenda. That's how the older generations tend to do it, and that's how I was doing it up until this COVID crisis actually happened. But now now that the order to work from home has occurred, I've seen the hesitancy from the older people to start using those online meeting forums. Like we use Microsoft Teams, but I know there's WebEx. You could use Skype as well. I think there was more of an adoption from the younger generation. My peers use Teams almost interchangeably with email. They prefer Teams because it's a quicker response time. You don't have to wait for the email to come. You can get your answer directly. Even more than that, if you're not getting it fast enough, I've had coworkers text me because they know they always have my phone on me, and I'll be able to look at that quickly. So I don't see there being difficulties, more adapting to the new ways of communicating and adapting to new technology that's coming out.
Perfect. Thanks, Kyle. Pat, as someone who previously didn't support working from home, did you find it difficult to properly communicate with everyone remotely? And what are some of the best ways that you found to communicate without being face-to-face?
Yeah, I'd say like Tim, I was more old school in my thinking around work from home and felt maybe not like the guy with the horn, but not that dramatic, but always felt, my brother's worked from home for 20 something years in sales, and I always kid him, he's really not working and he doesn't have to go into the office for 50, 60 hours a week like I do. And again, like I said at the beginning, I found it's more efficient. I think the biggest challenge, and it's funny, Kyle, your generation, you said you've never been called on your office phone. Our culture prior to this work from home, you never called someone above you in the organizational hierarchy, so to speak, their cell phone, unless it was kind of a break glass for emergency, in case of emergency kind of moment, right? And I found that speed of communication and decision making has really accelerated because those barriers have been disabled, if you will, with this new work from home environment. So the tools we've been using, we're also Teams, but we use WebEx, we use Zoom. I've had lots of colleagues who just never used Teams before, never IM'd anybody, and now it's second nature. And so, the ability for a individual contributor to work directly with a vice president and text them or call their cell phone or Teams them has really sped up our decision-making process, and been awesome to see the collaborative environment and spirit of, let's get this job done, whatever the issue is we're working through. So I think overall it's been really positive. And I think just, how do you ensure, to Tim's point, and I echo that as well, on the risk here of career development and beyond that, just the general networking that occurs in the office when you're walking the halls or going into a conference room or having the meeting before the meeting or the meeting after the meeting where you get some additional insight. I think just staying intentional about how you make those connections, reaching to somebody after the big Teams call, texting them, IMing them or calling them on their cell phone and asking what their perspective was. That's going to have to be a little more forced, if you will, and maybe not as natural. But again, I think the barriers themselves have been kind of shattered, and the protocols, if you will, of the traditionalists, that kind of were in a place at our environment, it's been great to see those kind of erode.
Mm-hmm. Cody, Kyle talked a little bit about some technologies, but were there any new or different technologies that you found particularly helpful while being disconnected from your coworkers?
I would say, Kyle mentioned Microsoft Teams, and that was one of the newer technologies that we received, as a network-wide download to our computers from the IT team pretty quickly from when we transitioned to work from home. And I found that very effective because of the chat feature as well as the video conferencing. So I think one of the actual challenges that me and some of my peers have run into is we had too many different applications. So we have a Cisco product called Cisco Jabber, and it's basically just instant messaging. And you can also make phone calls. Like we got rid of landlines about 9 months ago, and now we just have a computer tethered phone number. And so that's like what's on my business card and how people reach me. But now we have, messages being exchanged in Outlook. We have Cisco Jabber. We have Teams, text messaging. And so I think American Airlines could actually stand to consolidate the systems that we use since Microsoft really supports all of those functions just in one application.
Mm-hmm. So we'll talk about the technology there. with Teams, and it has the video functionality, and a lot of the other types of communication devices might as well. For each of you, do you all use the video functionality, or are you just using audio? Are there any sort of rules in your organization regarding the use of these?
I could speak to that one. The first week, everyone turned on their camera. After that, nobody has turned it on since then. The first week, it was almost mandatory. We needed to see the person. You needed to know that they got dressed in the morning and took a shower. Right. That's almost accountability to your job. After that, I think there was a little bit more. We trust you. You don't need to turn on your camera, but the leaders, immediately when they realized that they could turn it off, everyone followed suit.
Anyone else?
Yeah, at FedEx, we're using it more often than not, and I think it's kind of what's the shadow you're casting, so modeling the behavior. And I think as our leadership is turning on the cameras consistently, and it's funny you say how you're dressed. I mean, for us, it's kind of the opposite. If I'm wearing a collared shirt, people are like, "Hey, man, you dressed up today." So I've never been able to grow a beard in my life because my vacation's only been a week and I grow really slow facial hair. So, I had a lot of team members IMing me and stuff going, "Wow, what's up with the beard?" That kind of thing. So we've kind of adopted the other way of let's default to camera on. In fact, we've got some folks in our org who will actually camera shame people if they're not turning it on. Like, "Hey, come on, turn it on. I've got mine on. My hair is messed up too." So I do think it's important. I do think it sets a positive, another connection point in this virtual world that's important to see people's response.
Mm-hmm. Tim or Cody?
I would piggyback off what Pat was saying. I think that the video element drives just a bit of accountability to the other person on the phone, because if there's not the video element, I hate to, call out the potential negatives, but you'll always have a few people that are just sort of tuned in, not quite listening. And I think once, you know that both people are on camera and you can effectively look into the other person's eyes and communicate that way, it's the best possible option that we have next to face. And it started out a little bit similar to Kyle in the sense that, folks were getting their collared shirts on, getting dressed in the morning. And then slowly but surely, people just became more comfortable with getting on camera in their regular, if you just had a T-shirt on, that just became fine, and everyone was comfortable with that. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I'm a fan of the video camera for sure. Because without the video camera, then it would just be a bunch of conference calls. And having been on the other line of conference calls and been in conferences where people called in, they're never really part of the group, and you're never really part of the group. Just try to get your words said in a conference call is really difficult. Mm-hmm. And with this camera technology, Cody's right. You can see people, you can see their expressions, their body language, to the point where I have a lot of calls with my key suppliers, and we video conference now constantly. And I feel closer to them now than I did when I used to call them on, and I feel almost as close as when I used to travel with them. So I think it's really powerful. When the ISM conference got canceled, I had a session on the PMI along with Tony Nieves, and we canceled that. We're very sorry about that. And then the request from ISM came in about, would you guys like to do this virtually? And we had just started up Teams. I hadn't really used it yet. I think I was still in the office at the time, so I was chasing PPE. But then once I got home and I had this device, I realized, like this conference here, this is an effective way to communicate with everybody who's on the line. And I think that we can express our opinions and our feelings pretty effectively here. Mm-hmm. So I'm not looking back at the request to do a video conference on the PMI session. I think I was absolutely wrong. And that's 8 weeks since I made that decision. 8 weeks later, I've changed my mind.
Mm-hmm. Great. I am going to stay with you here, Tim, for a second. And I want to know how you've managed the productivity of your team while being remote.
Well, so I was really concerned about that when we all went home. So what we did was we set up a big rules list. So I have 5 significant things that affect all my organization that I think we need to be concentrated on. And they're 1 through 5. The number 1 is the most important. And we refresh those collectively every week. We have a weekly Teams call amongst the core group, not just my direct reports, but other people who are contributing to those 5 major elements. And we're all on video. There's very few who aren't. Now, there's some some who had difficulty getting on video up until them opening up the grooming shops, but all those have been open now, so the video is well used. On my management team calls with the leadership team, we're all on video too. We may not all stay on video, but when we're talking, we put the video on. So when I asked every one of them to do an inventory of what they thought the most important thing was, and then the group of us got together and went through them, and they were 95% of the consensus opinion about what was important. Mm-hmm. So we use the top 5 issues. We look at them weekly. We revise them when we need to revise them. We've now expanded that team's call, which was my direct reports and keys, to a further group of people. So there's probably 20 people on the call now once a week. And then we're reinstituting the monthly all hands events that we used to have in the office. So that's the entire group. They'll log in on Teams, and I'll be able to communicate with them. So, I think I feel good about it. We did a survey at Ryder about to all the employees. How well do you think you're doing your job, and how well do you think you're connected with your management? And 98% of the people said that they were, and they were. And then we asked the supervisors, about 500, how well they thought they were leading their people. Did they have adequate metrics to do that? And again, 98% said that they were. You look at those numbers, and nobody wants to go back to the office. Yeah. So, and we're not in any hurry to do that. And I think that's right, because this thing has not gone away. It won't go away for probably another year. And there's no sense in putting people in harm's way.
Mm-hmm. So Kyle, as someone who's just really entering the workforce, how do you see this current working environment shaping the future of office work and supply management?
Well, similar to Cody, my company actually just built a $130 million facility as well, and it was about a week away from opening up before they had to shut everything down. So I as much as I want to say we're going to be going back to the offices now that we're investing all these millions and even billions in Cody's case towards these buildings, I think we're realizing that a lot of the work that we can do, we can do virtually. Granted, there are some things that do require to be there in person, a physical count of inventory or something like that, or receiving product in. They do need to have people there. But for the majority of the tasks of people that work in the office, I think they could be done virtually. But what happens if we do move to that virtual space? Well, you do lose the connection you have with your coworkers. As Pat mentioned, the networking events that you have simply from office conversations and the water cooler talks, simply from getting to know people. But on the other hand, if you move away from the offices, people get to spend more time at home. They get to spend more time with their family, which is something you really lose when you go to your 9-to-5 job or whatever your hours are, and you save the company money as well. They don't have to provide for the building. They don't have to keep the lights on. They don't have to keep the air conditioning on. So I think there will be quite a reduction in the number of office buildings that companies have and that they're utilizing. And I think we've already seen this from stated from a couple of companies. I was just reading that Facebook said within 5 to 10 years, they expect 50% of their entire company to be working virtually. And Twitter said most of their employees could work forever virtually. So I think there's a lot of companies that just realize that a lot of the tasks could be done virtually, and they don't need to be face-to-face, few feet away from the other person.
Okay. Now, Tim, because you're on the other end of the generational spectrum here, what do you think the future of office work and supply management will be?
I don't think it's really going to be clear until the virus is over, honestly, because people are being asked to go back to the work environment. Some of them may have conditions that make them more susceptible to picking up the virus. Some might be in that age group where if you do pick it up, it's going to be a harder haul to get out of it. So I'm not really sure whether I have a full opinion of that until management teams are able to make the decision based on productivity, not just on safety. And like I said, we're not going to force people back. We're going to ask them to come back. We do have people out in the field that, we're an essential worker, like FedEx is, and we had a lot of people working. And we had a lot of people working in some pretty difficult environments. We had people going into hotspots delivering food and things, and a lot of those grocery stores and things shut down. We didn't force anybody to do it. They did it voluntarily. They're really heroes. So, we'll do the same thing here as we return to our office buildings. But I think I was thinking about this before I called in. I'm going to go back to when I started my career, as I started this conversation. I didn't really know much. Matter of fact, I knew nothing. So what I did was I worked hard. And in those days, the harder you worked, the more you were looked at. And it didn't matter whether you were really good or not. It's just work hard. So I would work 50 hours a week because that showed my commitment. I don't know whether I was capable or not, but that gave me the credibility really to learn a little bit. And so, probably somewhere between 3 and 5 years into my career, I felt that I was working hard and I was pretty effective. And I got a couple of promotions out of that. So I think, the virtual workplace, how do you convince anybody you're working hard? I mean, before it was all about just being there, and I know the thing about, you've got defined work products. If you're producing those work products within a reasonable period of time, you're getting your job done. But in an office environment, I've always felt that people can always produce 10 to 20% more than what they're producing, no matter how hard you're working. So, and how do you really gauge that anymore? But I just want to kind of pass that on. The video is very powerful, I think, very powerful, because it's almost like you're there. It's almost like, beam me to the office. And, when I started my career, the harder I worked, the more I was recognized, the more challenges I was given. And right now, nobody would really know.
Pat, do you think that your preferred working environment will change as a result of all of this working from home?
We're deep into our return to office plans. Obviously, safety first for all of our employees. And to Tim's comment, this is by no means over, and no one really has the crystal ball. So, of course, we've already prepped all of our office facilities with proper signage and social distancing formats, et cetera. And we're talking about alternate work days for office employees and phased approaches for folks coming back. We also did a survey, a slightly different one than what it sounds like Ryder did, asking for our employees' preference. If you were able to, would you be willing to come back? What's your preferred work from home versus going into the office approach kind of thing? I haven't seen the results of that, but I personally answered I'd prefer to work from home. My wife may not, but I do enjoy working from home. I would make that, probably 90% of my days I'd stay at home and come in for, kind of an exceptional thing, a diversity event or all employee meeting, or, something where I'm getting a network with a broad section of our company from a cross-functional standpoint. But, the work meetings that we do internal to our teams, or even cross-functional meetings, are again, very efficient and effective from my perspective on getting the same collaborative results that we're known for delivering. So I don't think that that's a requirement for us to be successful. And again, as a kind of old school thinker on this, I've definitely been transformed and support a work from home environment. I think it's been fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Cody, how do you see all of this changing the industry and maybe working with suppliers and things in the future?
Yeah, that's a challenging question. I think, from the airlines perspective, it's a huge question. It's going to determine how successful we can be in the future, because we're in the business of moving, people all over the world, and corporations, businesses are one of our biggest clients. So from a supply chain management perspective, I think that one of the things that will emerge from this is sort of this additional channel of communication, and whether that's a performance review or a negotiation, we're sort of becoming more familiar with this video conferencing medium of communication, whereas previously it was really, things were done over the phone, and then really important meetings were done in person. But now I think this, a positive effect of this will be really engaging with our supply base more frequently on a video conference to help improve that relationship, try to get that quality communication in. And it also might push a few of the in-person meetings. It might kick those down the road a little bit and say, companies might decide to save as much money as they can on travel and wait until there's like a site visit, or somebody needs to visit a factory or a really important in-person negotiation in order to come and actually, engage live and get to shake hands and be together in person. So I think those are a few of the different trends that I would expect to see.
We have a couple questions from the audience that I'm going to ask for my line of questioning. So I want to ask this to Pat and Tim. How do you see this environment performing when onboarding and training a new employee?
Yeah, I'll start. We do have some folks. We're in a hiring freeze that, like most companies, I think they're all in. We had actually made offers to folks who were students and just graduated, so they started, June 1st, as an example. And that's a real challenge, quite frankly. And so we're, again, trying to be very intentional with our management team on having the traditional skip level intros, doing them via video call, making sure that they're getting multiple touch points within the org and not just their direct manager, that they're having the same, onboarding experience while virtual that we would expect to deliver for those team members. Quite frankly, the risk I see is the culture. How do you infuse the FedEx culture remotely? And, we have a very collaborative and transparent, and we call it Purple Promise, make sure every experience is outstanding for all customers, internal and external. So, how do you deliver that? That's really our opportunity here that we're focused on, and messaging consistently. Again, like I said, multiple touch points with different areas of the organization, so they're not coming in thinking this is a hierarchical. I can't go talk to my director, or Teams my VP, or what have you. And I think it takes a village, right? It takes that whole ecosystem of our team members reaching out to this new person, getting them acclimated to our ways of working as a company, and hopefully, spreading that culture. But we won't know if we're effective, obviously, for a year plus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good point, Pat, for sure. So, I do a lot of walking about. When I was in the office, I would walk about, just drop into somebody's cubicle and just chat. So what I've tried to do is I'll do the same thing with Teams. I'll just dial in video and just chat. And I think that kind of keeps you in touch. I think the issue about onboarding people, it depends at what level. If I was going to bring somebody in at a starting or moderate level, I don't think I would have that much concern initially, because I would assign somebody who would stay in touch with them on a continual basis. And at some point, everybody will be able to go into the office. So the question becomes, in the longer term, is you still have to relocate people. So when you find a candidate in California and there's a job in Washington, D.C., is part of it that they have to move. I mean, I think the IT organizations have been very flexible with this for a long, long time. They've telecommuted in or lived remotely for quite some time. And as my career has developed, more and more of my peers don't relocate. And having relocated about 8 times, I understand how difficult that is, how painful it is, and how unproductive in a lot of ways it is too. And I think we've got. So if I was going to hire a successor to me, I would be concerned about it, because how are they going to get to know the people? Pat's exactly right. How do you pass that culture, what the company's all about, onto somebody who isn't in the middle of it? And then also, how do you keep that culture 5 years from now if we're all working from home? I don't know those answers. Like I said, I think that we won't know those answers until the virus has a cure and we can all make choices. But I do know that in any group, you've got 20% of really high performers. You never have to worry about those people. They're going to work hard all the time. They're going to go for the most challenging assignments. They're self-motivated. They're going to do well. You've got 20% that may not be all that good, and they're there before and they'll be there forever, and you shouldn't really dwell too much on that. It's really, how do you motivate the other 60% to be part of the 20% that are the go-getters? How do you motivate them? My approach has always been to lead by example. Like I said from the beginning, I always worked a lot of hard hours because I thought that was important. But people see that I'm committed, and they either become committed themselves or they decide not to. And so you can separate the people that way. But I think I think that's it. We're going to have trouble, I think, as we staff and restaff. And I'm not sure where it's going to end. I think we're in a really unique spot here in business history that we're all going to learn a lot from.
Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. We are out of time. We got to shift to our last speaker. So thanks to all 4 of you for joining us. It was really interesting to hear all the different perspectives from the different generations. And I appreciate you sharing your stories with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.